Then something just snapped. Something inside of me. No, no more! That's it! I don't care! I didn't care anymore. I didn't care about being better than Kakarot. I didn't care about being a Super Saiyan. I didn't care if I lived. I didn't care about anything. And then it happened.
Introduce, and I'll include everything in the show notes.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me, Jin. A longtime listener on the podcast, first time caller. But yeah, no, I'm the artist formerly known as Low IQ Moron. Yeah, I used to be on Twitter under that handle. I have since deactivated my account. I did plan to periodically reactivate just to keep my account alive, but I think I'm off for good now because I forgot to do that and my account got nuked. So, but anyways, I am still active in the internet sphere in the form of my podcast, Thots and Prayers, spelled like thought, like THOT. And with my co-hosts Q and KB Goldtooth. So yeah, I don't know, we cover a lot of stuff, but whatever, conspiracy theories and stuff like that.
I think your third episode ago on the Trump assassination is my personal go-to episode for that subject. And I also did an episode on Call Rejects about that, but I also mentioned your episode just because I think it laid a lot of groundwork in maybe material terms of how I'm starting to think of it. Not that I don't have the esoteric layer. I mean, that's more what I do, but I think you guys, it's the trinity of, it's like the trivium. It's like you guys all bring the different elements that each of you sort of embody, and then it's very rational, it's very logical, and it's a discussion. And so I think that's what's really interesting about your show. And obviously it's an OG show, so I'm sure everybody's listening who knows who you are.
Yeah, well, yeah, I appreciate the shout out for that episode. I do feel like that was a good one on the Trump assassination attempt, quote unquote. And yeah, I mean, I actually do think we did a pretty good job on that one. And yeah, I didn't quite see a lot of other places covering it from the same perspective that we did. So
I mean, it's hard. It's a hard subject, especially right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Right. I mean, and I mean, I think you'll find, I mean, one of the main themes of our show is that pretty much any kind of current events topic is presented in a similar way, where there's these kind of mainstream narrative presented, and then there's usually sort of an official counter narrative that goes along with it. That'll be like the sort of officially sanctioned conspiracy theory for any kind of mainstream that kind of corresponds to any mainstream narrative. And then usually both of them are sort of misdirections. So
yeah, I totally agree with this. And this is something that I've been not maybe saying it so succinctly, but I think this is something that I'm thinking about. And I know that you guys, the three of you, have really hammered this home on your show, is this idea of the narrative and counter narrative.
Yeah, and I mean there are other people who have kind of guided me along that path to understanding things in that framework. But I think it's really important, and it took me a while to figure it out because, of course, when you first start just kind of questioning like the mainstream narrative, for me it was with COVID, but for other people it happened maybe say with 9/11 or any other various of these sort of impactful media events. But and then you start going the path. The first thing you're going to encounter when you're questioning the mainstream narrative is usually the kind of counter narrative. And you can pretty quickly see how that will start to lead you astray as well. And yeah, a lot of people that build up, credibility in that space, like Alex Jones, or now like with the Trump thing, you have some of these newer figures like Tucker Carlson. And, if you're paying close enough attention, you can see how they're playing a role that reinforces a narrative, a counter narrative that, I don't know, it's
serves the same master.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Well said.
I think this is how I think of it, as I really do think of it in a Kabbalistic way, because as I said in my series, which was Zach Shumar, there's a mappable, you can map the dialectic through the tree. You have to be really smart. I mean, I'm not saying I'm able to just like look at the tree and just being like, okay, but there are rules that are laid out. Like there are 3 moves, counter moves, that are required for dialectical rectification. Meaning if you make a mistake in like how you're traveling, okay, so you're taking a colored pencil, you're traveling it through the tree, you're saying I want to do X, Y, and Z. So if you make a mistake and make a wrong turn, or something happens, it takes 3 counter moves to fix that error. That's how it's thought of. So I have been trying, although again, I'm not a particular, I don't have a Hebrew language background. This would be really helpful for this. but you can map it. You can, if you're just like a little smart, I think you can. I think it's totally possible. You just have to really pay attention, and you cannot let your feelings get in the way of the map. You have to just let it be organic, and it reveals itself, through itself rather than your perception.
Interesting. So can you, this is not I'm fascinated by all this stuff that you talk about. I have to say my background in it and my level of understanding is not, anywhere near close to the level that you're operating on. Can you give me an example of like something you're like a specific, example of how this might work in practice?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for that compliment. I'm not, I've had Sachi on. Sachi's coming back. If I don't say, he is really the Kabbalah master, and I am just his like inferior junior. But I am good at it. But the truth is that I'm good at it because of Tantra. I'm good at it because of Buddhism. I'm not necessarily good at it because I'm so good at the Hebrew tree. Now, when I look at the Hebrew tree and the medieval Kabbalah, as opposed to Hermetic Kabbalah, I'm not that great at Hermetic Kabbalah, which is the more recent sort of incarnation. But it's very similar. It's very similar to Buddhist thinking. There's like a Buddhist ontology, logic, and reasoning of why you do the things that you do, and sort of working through the spheres in that way. So it is very similar. So I just relate those experiences, and then also maybe magical experiences that I've had. That helps you. I know this is going to sound really weird to people, but having those experiences, you see colors, you see things, not things. It's exactly like how a sphere is described. There are layers, there are meanings, there are words, there are colors, there are sounds. Maybe there's no sound. Maybe, and that's very important in your mapping of it. So to go back to your question of an example, I think the Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes thing, I don't know how comfortable you are discussing this, but I'll just say in terms of responding to what you're asking, to me, that's something that is standing out right now, because there's I was never into Nick. I don't like him. I don't, it's not like I hate him. I just think he is what he is. And I don't agree with his narrative.
He's another kind of counter narrative figure.
Exactly.
I would say.
Exactly. Yeah. He's like a chaos agent in many ways. And, I'm not about, my position, I think, is more anti-war in the sense that I could not cheer on either side of any conflict, really. Like I don't want to push my consciousness out. I know that sounds very magical, but it kind of is. It's like I don't want to focus on those things. I don't want to support anyone. Like, people can make their criticisms of Israel. and that's totally fine. And they can make their criticisms of Judaism. That's totally fine. But I think that it's a much deeper. I think it's more of a bloodline thing. I think it has those exterior names that we like, Judaism or Israel or Zionism. Like, what even is that anymore? Because who are the left? Like, the left have been wrong about, and I'm not even saying this for someone that's on the right. I'm just saying the left have been so wrong about everything. Everything.
Yes.
Everything.
Yeah.
And so how can then we turn around and being like, yeah, let's cheer on Palestine, while all these freaks, and I'm sorry, that's who's it's like the George Floyd thing, right? It's like all over. So in my thinking, it's not that I don't even buy the narrative at face value. I think that's where I'm at. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't believe it. I think it's all bullshit. If we're being really honest, like if I'm being really, really honest, I think it's all bullshit. I think they just show us the little flicker on social media. They have these stupid videos that are so, I mean, they're so over the top. They're like,
oh yeah,
guys carrying like chunks of shawarma meat, and then they're like acting like it's their kid and
eating babies. Yeah, I know. I mean,
it's just so outrageous. It's like a really bad 90s movie, and it doesn't even look that good.
I know, and I think that's a hallmark of a lot of this, like, I don't know if you want to call it propaganda or it is almost like intentionally hokey, especially once you kind of start to see it for what it is. Once you start sort of not accepting it at face value, you can take this step back and realize that it is sort of like B movie quality productions, you know.
That's the thing. If you take your feelings out of it, the truth of it, just like in Kabbalah, becomes a lot more transparent. It becomes a lot more obvious. But but before that, when you're putting your feelings and you're saying, "Oh, my poor Browns," or whatever it is, whatever side it is, you're clouding it. You're clouding it with preconception and also conception, because you are conceiving of an ending in some ways of thinking. So I think, okay, so there's the division. Nick's on one side. He kind of speaks to that, I guess, Zoomer leftist anti-imperialism. I don't even know what to call it. Candace had this huge, pretty big audience. I think biggest on Daily Wire. And, she's totally blown it. And sometimes I think that I think that they do it on purpose. Sometimes I think they crash on purpose, and it's narrative control. It's
because so Daily Wire, I mean, I'm actually haven't been following this very closely, but just to even clarify my understanding, if not for anyone else, but Daily Wire is a Jewish-run company. Is that correct? Like, it's got Ben Shapiro and all. Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly, I mean, it's clearly tied to greater Judaism and whatever narrative that that means. So I don't like to call things Zionist, because I think that label gets horribly misapplied to things, especially now. Like, it's 2024. What does that really mean?
Right. Oh, totally agree. But then I just to kind of get a background for this, what you're talking about. Then Candace Owens recently, and again, I haven't really been following this, but bits and pieces I picked up. Seems like she's been kind of hammering on the JQ lately.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah.
Okay. Like, really hard. Like, yeah, we all noticed. Like, we all noticed in like 2021. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, even for me, for like, it was like maybe a month, I was like, oh my God, the Sabatines, the Frankists, like, you go down the rabbit hole. That's what happened. And she is doing the rabbit hole in public, but it's like 3 years after the internet.
Right. Right. So, yeah. So, and then it's always like you kind of have to wonder to what percent is even this perceived split a little bit of kayfabe, you know?
Yeah, you're totally right about that.
I mean, it could be real. I really don't know, but it's a question that I will always have to, I mean, ask myself, you know.
I mean, her
um,
husband's in the Pilgrim Society. The father's a lord. There is
right.
a Fabian plot to take over America. I mean, that is real. People tend to
Uh-huh.
forget about that because it's all about the J's, right? The JQ.
Right.
But you know, the original plot was, how does the crown retain or get back America if they haven't already? Who knows? I mean, there's something really obvious about a lot of this, and it is a lot of kayfabe. It's a lot of entertainment, infotainment, like daytime wrestling on TV.
Mhm.
90s. It's Jerry Springer.
Right. Yeah, it is. And I think even, yeah, going back to the whole Israel, Palestine, Nick Fuentes, all this stuff, like on one level, which it absolutely 100% works, is just making everyone furious and
Mhm, mhm,
irrational
mhm.
and kind of lower a degrading of consciousness, I would say.
I agree.
And yeah, like you get either you're angry about Zionism and the Jews that run the banks and whatever, or you're outraged by the atrocities of the Israeli war crimes and the eating babies and whatever, you know. So it's like no matter which side you're on, you're losing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a low simmering. I think Q said this. It's like a low grade fear on the last
Hmm.
episode. It's low grade misery, low grade fear. And it is about, there is something rather Calvinist. Like, I know people want to talk about the Jews all the time, but there is something rather Calvinist about putting degradation into people's faces. And degradation doesn't just mean like the TQ stuff, but I think it's also about the farce. Like you were saying, like it's like, yeah, it's very B movie. It's right in front of your face, and
Hmm.
it's supposed to be demoralizing.
100% agree. And that's, yeah, another dimension of the whole thing. The really the key goal of what all this propaganda is, it's in a general sense, it's not really designed to nudge people into a specific action or even indoctrinate them into a certain ideology. It's really ongoing, ever shifting psychological warfare whose ultimate purpose is to demoralize everyone into submission, basically.
I think this is part of the reason why it's become mystified again. There is a very communist element about this degradation.
Hmm.
And, you know, the right, I do think that some of them understand what that means, but I think that most of them don't. But I also don't think the left wing even fathoms what that even really is or what that
Right.
looks. Communism has this very Gevura warlike quality with the hammer. And then it
Hmm.
also has the sickle. And everybody
Mm.
says, oh, the sickle is Saturnian. But that sickle is not Saturnian. That sickle is the symbol of the moon Ceres. So it is the sickle
Interesting.
for Malkuth. So it's saying it's threshing the wheat of the lowest common denominator, taking that and then forging it in a fire of severity or a fire of restricted mercy, meaning that you're not kind to it, you don't treat it carefully, but you kind of see what arises. Like if you're brewing alcohol, that's kind of the idea, is that you're applying fire to this process and some spirits get destroyed, and then you have a more purified whole at the end.
Interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I think kind of something you just said, like the right wing, like, you know, they don't necessarily get it per se. Like a lot of them, you know, they I think most of them do want to kind of resist this
Mhm.
idea of like a new world order,
Yeah.
etc. But they don't really get it. They find themselves rerouted into these dead ends and what have you. But I think the difference with the left is that they actually want the new world order. Like,
Yeah, I
so
agree with that.
so that's I think the kind of fundamental distinction. And I think that kind of actually gets into like the topic that we were kind of planning
Yeah,
to
why don't you,
discuss.
I'm sorry, why don't you introduce the topic that we...
No, yeah, no, I think that was an excellent segue. And it also kind of you led us right there with the hammer and the sickle too. So I guess this will probably be a pretty unstructured conversation, but the idea that I approached you with was basically the idea that leftism itself is kind of I don't know, a cult, has its roots in occultism and is a project of a sort of an occult movement that operates in like elite circles, the same people who are like waging this psychological warfare that we've been discussing. And so, I mean, that's a broad topic, but I think it's interesting. There's a lot we can talk about, and the main kind of text that got me thinking about this stuff is Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. It's a controversial text and by a controversial author, Michael A. Hoffman II. I think I don't agree with him 100% on everything. I think he has a lot to offer. And I think that a lot of the bad rep that he gets is a smear campaign, basically to discredit him because he's kind of onto something with a lot of his thinking, in my opinion. But I legitimately don't agree with him on everything. For example, he thinks the moon landing was real. So, but yeah. So I'm curious. Have you? The book that I read was Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. I'm curious. Have you read that book or?
I have not read that book, but I am somewhat familiar with Hoffman. So I'm
Okay.
not a total noob when it comes to his material, but it is not my specialty. However, I do think that where I can add to it is I do think he had some interesting ideas, and I did speak about this a little bit with Zach. Is his idea of revelation of the method, because I think it's one of the more complex and nuanced ideas that is in the broader consciousness that he popularized. And I'm not sure if he didn't fully grasp it or the popular understanding is just a little flawed, because it's a very difficult topic to really get into, especially with my Buddhist background, like to really discuss what karma really is and how it functions in the universe. I think it becomes complicated. Maybe I overcomplicate it, so I'll own that. But I agree with you. I think he offers a lot, and I think at least as a thought experiment to think about some of the things that he's saying. It doesn't mean it has to be true, but I think you can treat it conceptually.
Right. And so, I mean, a lot of what he focuses on is symbolism, and that there's this kind of hidden esoteric language that is communicated to the public, basically, and he calls it the Twilight Language, and he calls, like, I guess, like the powers that be, he calls them the cryptocracy, like this secret government that communicates through this sort of hidden language, and it's highly symbolic. And so he kind of decodes a lot of these media events through the lens of this Twilight Language. But what made me think of this when you started talking about the hammer and sickle is that he specifically analyzes that symbol as, it's the well-known communist symbol, and he traces it to these kind of occult roots. But as you were saying, you were disagreeing. He traces the sickle to that Saturnian symbol that you were describing, that you actually had a different interpretation. But I just thought that was interesting.
Well,
But
Saturn. So sorry.
no, go ahead. No.
I'll just say this about the Saturnian sickle. So I didn't just come up with it. I think a lot of people misattribute things to Saturn because he becomes a boogeyman. But if you understand it in a more higher minded Buddhist or Kabbalistic way, that is where God really comes into formation. Like that's the highest sphere that we can access, that God is more fully there than the lower ones. So, but I do think that there has been a sort of move to villainize that sphere and Saturn and time, because time is really just a conceptual marker. And yes, it is related to the movement of the, if you planets, if you believe in them, or at least the moon and the sun. So time is not our enemy, really. I mean, that's not really the problem. It's how we conceptualize of time and what markers we use to signify the events in the world. So Saturn, it's the threshing of the old wheat. It's like the wheat that sat there all the entire, after you've harvest, there's people let it go fallow. So, but then they will do it for the animals. They'll scythe the wheat for animals only. It's like maybe it's too damp or maybe it wasn't good quality. That's the Saturnian wheat. But the hand scythe, that really represents the common peasant farmer. And obviously, I mean, it's been a decade since I was a leftist, but like I remember a lot Mao talking about peasant farmers coming into the city to work in the factories, and Stalin was like, you know, the peasants that remained in the country, they're not intellectually capable of running a country, so we're going to choose whatever group. I mean, it's very Luciferian. I mean, all of left-wing thought is very Luciferian. How do we forge the perfect man or woman, but the perfect person, but it's through these greater state mechanisms. It is the force. It's the grinding wheel of the state that does the forging. It is not the person's own consciousness.
Right. And so I'm trying to think of how to, so like, I think a key part of this is, like, I mean, everyone, it's kind of almost like a meme at this point about certain conspiracy things, like, you know, Skull and Bones Society at Yale University, you know, and how like both President Bush's and John Kerry and all these people are Skull and Bones. The Skull and Bones has a massive presence like in the intelligence agencies and in banking and all these things. So, but these type of secret societies, I guess Hoffman's argument, and one that I'm sympathetic to, is that these secret societies actually carry a sort of lineage, spiritual or ideological or something, that goes back to the age of enlightenment and this kind of shift away from like religion, which was, and you know, I think there probably were like legitimate reasons. Like, I'm not saying the church was this perfect institution, so I think it makes sense that there could have been some legitimate, right, like grievances that may have caused this shift, but away from like religiosity, spirituality, towards rationalism. And these secret societies that emerged at that time have carried forward with this ideology that Hoffman actually traces back to Kabbalah. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that idea.
Well, it's very interesting because Nick from Occult Rejects and I have sort of been coming to separate but similar conclusions. Because if you understand the early grimoire publishing, say from the 11th or 12th century, this is also when the first full Kabbalah texts are being published in North Africa and Italy and France. But there's a confluence of grimoire publishing from, we'll say, Arabia or Central Asia, somewhere in that region. But usually they're Arabic texts or Mughalized Arabic texts, meaning they're originally in Persian, but then they're translated into Arabic and then carried over by merchant caravans or whatever. So there clearly was this synthesis of understanding Christianity in a mystical lens, because that was already happening, whether people want to say that's happening in like Cathar circles or Templar circles. And but this is like, but the Kabbalah is, and I'm not trying to up it. I'm not, you know, I'm not like, yay, Kabbalah, like I am a Buddhist, like but But real medieval Kabbalah is, I'm not going to say perfect, but it's a very excellent hermeneutic. It works very, very well. It provides a very crystalline map of the cosmos and the way we think and consciousness and who God is and where to find him. So I think that when you look at like Hildegard of Bingen, when you look at a lot of the 16th century, like we're nearing the Enlightenment, and then the 17th century, and you're like a lot of people are innovating within the church, and they are using, because of Pico della Mirandola, he was introducing this idea of applying Christian Kabbalah to the Bible. And most innovative the church had ever been was really in this Enlightenment period. So yes, I agree with you that people were moving towards this rationalism and materialism. But then there's also this other movement where people were producing amazing art, were producing a lot of different ideas of the world. And yeah, there is a common lineage with Hebrew Kabbalah. But let's just, I guess what I want to say, and I'll just say it, is that the tree really comes from Iran and Central Asia. And it's just that Jews tend to be high IQ, so they kind of took it and they were able to understand a lot of it and preserve it. And the tree should be thought of more as a novel system, not just a Jewish or whatever even that is system. It's really like it's a preservation of that older thinking. I'm not saying it's pagan or evil or satanic. I actually don't think any of those things. I think it's actually quite good. But you can immediately see when you're doing it how people take it the wrong way, how people can use dialectical alchemy to intentionally and sometimes unintentionally produce negative results, produce negative thought forms, produce gross magical effects, which is actually not what you're supposed to do with Kabbalah. You're never supposed to do that. You're supposed to retain that lightning consciousness, the pristine, they call it. So there's a lake in Siberia, it's called Lake Baikal. During the day, if you cut a block of ice, it looks exactly like the sky in that location, which is turquoise. When you take the same block of ice and you put it up to the sky at night, it looks like dark blue flecked with stars, just like the sky. But really, the ice is not blue or turquoise. The ice is really clear. That is the perfect lesson of Kabbalah. It's that really what we perceive is not always what things are. So I agree with Hoffman that Kabbalah is probably the origin, and this is like the perfect sort of historical moment where all of these things are gathering in confluence together. But I hesitate to say that, if only because people often draw the wrong conclusion of what that means.
Right. Well, and I mean, even like Hoffman himself takes a lot of heat for being anti-Semitic or whatever, but his analysis is really much more nuanced than just like, oh, Kabbalah is bad and you Jews are bad. It's like, there's a whole lineage of synthesis of different, I guess, kind of religious traditions. Like there's the Hermetic component, which is, I guess, like from some kind of ancient Egyptian,
well, that's what
or Greek thing, or yeah. So, or, I don't even, I'm in over my head when it comes to that kind of stuff. But basically the point is that the elite secret societies of today have continued along this sort of tradition. And I think there's an idea of it's the idea there, the God, the deity that they speak of is not, they call it like the builder or like the architect. And I think it is more of supposed to be like an allusion to Lucifer, essentially. And the idea is that the purpose of humanity is to perfect creation, like to, I guess, which is sort of, I guess, where the idea comes in from Hoffman's perspective, who is a Christian, that it's sort of like going back to the idea of Eden and Adam and Eve, that like creation was perfect, and then, you know, it's just the human nature that has, you know, rendered it imperfect, and that any attempt to kind of bring it to a state of perfection is fundamentally kind of hubristic, I guess. And so that to me is, I guess, where you start to see the origins of leftism, where as part of this, where it's like essentially a utopian type of idea, the idea that like the world isn't perfect, but it can be through, well, so I guess essentially through rendering it in like a new world order. But I think like one way to like I was trying to think about, it'd be helpful to have some definitions here. Like when we're talking about like what I'm saying leftism, like what is leftism? I think it means a lot of different things, but I think if you like look at it like what it is today, it's a few different things. But like there's, I guess, a set of kind of like policy positions that you could consider, where it's like they're supposed to be like anti-oppression. You know, they're pro-LGBT, pro-trans, pro-women's rights, diversity, abortion, you know. So those are all kind of like utopian kind of projects of like there's this, you know, this problem here that we need to like intervene to fix. And well, in the case of abortion, I guess you also just have arguably a fairly morbid or almost occult type practice of
100%.
sacrifice there, like sacrificing a young innocent life or proto life for some other purpose. Then you also have another dimension is like Marxism is thought of as leftism in the popular eye. And like, I think one way of thinking about that is pretty like literally violent detachment from traditional culture, ways of being, with the purpose of explicitly creating atheistic states for the betterment of humanity, you know. And then you also have this kind of anti-hierarchical component, which is that it's kind of trying to like neutralize everyone, to make everyone, I don't know if you want to call it like rendering out the importance of anyone's kind of individuality or significance as a being, and you just serve the greater whole. And then you also have this idea of like cooperation, and that everyone just needs to cooperate, and it's opposed to like self-reliance or individualism. And what that means in practice is basically ceding one's autonomy and authority to government or experts who, you know, quote unquote, know better. And then, but I think like the common thread between like all these different components, and there's probably more that I'm leaving out, but I think a thread that ties them all together is basically these are all very like pro, you know, new world order, for lack of a better term, which I think can sound kind of crazy to some people if you're not, you know, just kind of not thought much about this before, or not accustomed to hearing like phrases like that taken in any kind of serious way. But I think it's something that like that has been a project of these elite secret societies for a long time. And, you know, if you kind of understand it through that lens, you can kind of see this evolution and over time. So yeah, I don't know, that I kind of want to get your thoughts on it, because I feel like you can probably be a lot more articulate about it than I can. But that was kind of like my general thesis, I guess.
You did a great job. You really did. Honestly, I was thinking about like how I would map, like following along, but then mapping. I drew my own little tree in my March notes. Anyways, I was mapping along. So you said three. You kind of gave, I guess you gave like five or six, but I wrote down three that I thought distilled the essence of what you were saying, and I used more Freemasonic or Kabbalistic words. So the first one was rectification. So this kind of anti-oppression, transforming what is a perceived injustice. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's a perceptual injustice. It doesn't mean that there is. It doesn't even have to have a historical foundation. It just has to be understood as that, or perceived as that, as seen as that. But it
Mm.
doesn't necessarily mean that there is. So I think rectification is the sort of turning of the wheel, turning of the swastika. It is the way to go in a progressive way. That's what it is. It's to turn leftward. It's to turn towards the blue pillar. So in my opinion, a lot of this is because of like what we see, like the DNC color, like that blue is the chesed blue. It's the blue of mercy. It's this ocean that is beautiful, but it also, if you keep things in an ocean, they're going to drown, because we're not made to live in an ocean, right? We can only be born in water. We're not meant to live there.
Mm.
So a lot of what I see, and from what you even described, is this kind of blue pillar worship of Jupiter. And that seems to be clear from both sides. So I'm not just saying it is just leftists, because I actually think there's a lot of Jupiter worship in a lot of other things as well. In a lot of the esoteric fascist bros, they will say they worship the black sun, but if you kind of pierce or penetrate their beliefs, it really is a lot about Jupiter. It's a lot about the swastika. That's really a Jupiterian
Interesting.
symbol, because that's the only planet that really expands outwards. It expands its orbit. I mean, I'm not saying NASA tells us the truth, but I'm saying, that's how it's considered, is that Jupiter expands the orbit of all the other planets around it, and
Interesting.
and it keeps Saturn in check through, like, well, Saturn kind of keeps Jupiter in check. They have a kind of dialectical tension, you could say. There's like a chain between them, and Jupiter slowly pulls it along, and Saturn is very slow to react. That's kind of the idea. So the next thing you were talking about was this idea of transgression, and like all of the abortion of like the all the pedo stuff, everything, like all the rainbow stuff, everything, just put it all
Mhm.
together. That is very transgressive. So that in and of itself is not related to Jupiter, but if there is an element of where people say, "Oh, Saturn's the evil time king," or whatever, and that might be true. Like he might be the time king. That's one way to think of it for sure. But I also think if you have daddy issues, well, if you no seriously, but if you have
Mhm.
daddy issues, the patriarch is going to be the boogeyman. The
Mhm.
patriarch who keeps things in order, because that's what Saturn really does. It keeps us all in check. It keeps us all within bounds, and Jupiter is boundless. It kind of pushes,
Mhm.
yeah, it always pushes the boundary. And so even though in and of itself it's not transgressive, people's interpretation of that movement can be transgressive. And they can say, well, we want to do transgressive things to make the wheel turn a little more. So that's the second one.
Interesting.
And then the third one, and then I'll shut up and let you.
No, I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
Okay. So then the third one I had is two points, but really the same point. So reconfiguration and homogenization. And then I also wrote longhouse. So if you you can look on a Freemasonic tree or Kabbalistic tree for people listening. If you look where Jupiter or Chesed is, right beneath it is Venus or Netzach. And that is associated with the feminine divine force. And so you will see this a lot. It's very Babylon mother. It's like they trap her in everyone knows in the popular imaginary is the Seal of Solomon, or the Star of David. But that is a much older symbol. We won't get into it, but it has a connotation of trapping sort of this primordial Earth Mother, we'll say, but it's not necessarily that. But okay, so they keep her sort of, her body becomes the corpus upon which the principalities are built or the kingdoms are built. So she kind of is the corpse of formation. It requires her sort of sacrifice to come into existence. Or you could see her as a Lilith figure who exists under the earth, that is fed with transgression. So that kind of is the mother of the longhouse, if you want to say it like that. So if you're going up the tree, you can say you're going, so the one of the figures of Mercury, or Hode, wields a bow and arrow. And why is this important? Because you have to imagine it as a arrow of light. So if you're at Hode, you're shooting an arrow towards Jupiter. I'm not going to explain the reason why, but people can just trust me. There's an innate relationship between those two. Okay, so there's a girl, say a girl standing on Mercury. She's shooting her bow and arrow. Her arrow of light goes through, hits the ocean. What happens? Explosion of light, sparks, because it's fire, right? Pure fire hitting the water. Then you can imagine this kind of backlash, like when you see an explosion, like a naval explosion, there's always like a splash upwards, right? Well, that's Mars. That's raising its hammer. That's the potential energy being sort of backdrafted, just like that movie Backdraft. That's what Gavura is. It's bringing the hammer back up. It's taking the kinetic energy and moving it in the opposing direction. Then that hammer comes back down, right? Just like a wave, it has multiple sort of impacts. That goes to Chokmah. Chokmah takes that fire, takes that water, takes that synthetic process. It cannot do anything with it because that is a pristine sphere. It's a sphere of, it's just an idea. Nothing can really happen there because it's an idea. It has no spark of its own, but it can take of those other sparks. It can shoot it into Binah. Binah is the kind of crystalline formation. Everybody says Saturn was the demiurge, whatever, but that's actually not true. Saturn is just the gravitational force. It kind of brings us into our bodies. It encloses us so our blood doesn't flow out in infinite expansion. But we don't have life at Binah. So at Binah has to go back down to Venus. And from Venus, we are able to arise on the garden. And usually the blue pillar is not associated with female deities, but in a Kabbalistic way, that's not true, or a Freemasonic way. It's usually the red pillar is associated with the mother, and the blue pillar is associated with the father. Venus is really important because that's really where we come into life. That is where the light of God really comes through, even though that comes through at Kether. Venus is the diamond. It's a diamond that shines the light through, and then we can name the colors and we can portion out what's called life force and fortune. So that's really how we come into formation. And so, but if you overweight the blue pillar and you're overweighting this, it's infinite expansion. I think that's a lot to do with the New World Order, because this is a very age of Aquarius thinking that they've been talking about this since 1947, since Liber 49. So, and even before that, the Theosophists were really into the age of Aquarius. All the spiritualists are into the age of Aquarius. So you have about 200 years. All the British Fabians, they it's their thing. So they're moving us into this era of utopia. That can only exist because utopia is an idea. It's not a formation, so it cannot really exist on the blue pillar. It requires the red pillar to be in some kind of synthesis. It doesn't have to be balanced, but it requires the red pillar to work. So I think, to go back to even what we were speaking about at the very beginning, about how both sides are used to reach maybe a single conclusion or an outcome, I think that's really what I'm talking about. It's like, how do their little spells, rituals, ideas come into formation, and through who? And that's the thing. And you said this really well also, is that it comes through multiple facets. There are multiple streams that penetrate the popular consciousness that can lead us in it still it all leads us in one direction, but it appears there are multiple paths.
That was fascinating, honestly. So I just want to okay. So you said rectification, you said transgression, and then you said homogenization. Is that accurate? Okay. So interesting. So I think that's a great summary of all the things I was trying to say. I would never have thought of it in those terms, or to bring it down to distill it that clearly. But that is super interesting. And something else that you were talking about made me think of another aspect of this kind of Hoffman theory, is the idea of alchemy and alchemical transformation. And so this is another, I guess, kind of idea that's associated with the Enlightenment era. And people tend to think of it as like literally kind of transforming base metals into gold. But in Hoffman's understanding, or like what he's saying, how these Masonic societies conceive of alchemy is actually transforming humanity. And so that is the kind of goal of these organizations, and attempting to kind of initiate this new world order, etc., is through the alchemical transformation of humanity in order to essentially make us receptive to their ideology and embracing their worldview, such that we will accept a new world order. I think another that you see that again in a lot of ways, but one thing that I actually forgot to mention too in my initial kind of outline of like things associated with leftism today, another big one is science, right? Like the kind of supremacy of rationalism and science overall. And a really big way that, I mean, it's propagandized everywhere. Like, I mean, evolution and dinosaurs, are this kind of like, to me, they kind of seem like this rationalist, scientific reimagining of like the dragon myth kind of thing. Like, but I think the biggest one probably is space, like outer space. And I don't know, I don't really have a strong opinion about like if space is real, or the planets and all that, and what they are, or what the cosmos is at this point. But you can see the propagandistic purpose that the space narrative serves, right? Because it's always presented as like this infinite, expansive universe, and like you're nothing but like a speck of dust in this massive, vast, space of nothingness and whatever. It's like just completely trying to de-spiritualize or make insignificant the value of life, and then also taking away, destroying the idea of God, I think. Because I mean, again, this is not my area of expertise, but like the Bible, like I wasn't even raised religious in any way. Like I'm probably the most religious I ever have been in my life now as a result of going through all this stuff. But even then, I'm more kind of spiritual than adhering to any particular religious dogma or something. But I'm familiar with the Bible and this idea of like a geocentric cosmos, like a earth-centered universe where God created humanity, and we are, this is the stage on which it all happens. It seems to try to diminish the importance of that and just say, well, it doesn't really matter. There's probably like all these other planets with other weird life forms on there, and whatever. It's all just kind of whatever. So yeah, and then to me that fits in with the processing of like just trying to over time just make people demoralized, take away their self-worth or sense of spiritual meaning.
You know, you touched on some really interesting things, and I think you don't give yourself enough credit. I don't know. I don't think you're being false humility or anything. I'm not even teasing you. I think that you are I find it very cogent and very like illuminate what you're saying. And I've also, obviously, I've told you this, is when I listen to the show, I find you very prescient on this topic, especially of the science. So, because the truth is that even though you're not intending to, the way you articulate it is how I would articulate it if I was using more materialist language. Like how I would say the science happens, like the science TM. So I'm talking institutional science, not necessarily the theory of science or the practice of science, but institutional science. So what we see as science, that happens at Tippereth, or the sun. There is a way of thinking in Sephardic astrology, which is the earliest kind of Jewish astrology that was written down by the sages, directly copying the Zoroastrian text. But obviously, they interpret it in their own way. The sun can be, I'm not saying the sun is, but the sun sometimes is thought of as producing a false illumination. And in deeper Jewish theology, Yesod, or the moon, is much more important. And if just 10 minutes ago, I said, or there's portioning of fortune and life force that happens at Yesod. There's also another way of thinking of this in Christian eschatology, where in the book of Revelations, when they're talking about the mother standing on the moon, holding the child, the boy, I guess it's the Christ figure, and then the dragon is standing on the earth. Well, what is that really telling us? That is telling us that really the true formation, Dath, this hidden sphere that all the magicians love because it is the abyss. Well, I mean, it is the abyss, but it's also sort of a mirror of ourselves and of our fears and of our negative consciousness. But at the other side of that, at the other side of the threshold or the doorway, after the abyss, that is where you can access, at least for a brief moment, that kind of lightning strike, that pristine God consciousness. So that really is at the moon, at Yesod. And there's a really great quote that I love from Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah 46. And it's, the rock of Jah is in Hashem. That is literally what that means. It means like the knowledge, the like where we are, where we really are. Because Malkuth isn't really where we live. Malkuth is really our bodies, like our physical bodies. And everything takes place in that kind of tripartite, well, Jews think of it as in there's more layers than the three worlds, but we'll use that because I'm Buddhist, so we'll just say three worlds. So there are three worlds, but it's that internal process. Then there's a process at consciousness, that's kind of an inner process. And then there's an external process, which is the least important, which is that cosmological layer, whatever the planets may be. If that is metals in the sky floating around, like planetary metals, and then they're saying it's the planets. I don't know what that stuff is. I don't know what the cosmos is. I'm not going to pretend to know. but that is the least important layer. And I think this is something that really interesting about what you're saying about leftism, where it's really about the agglomeration, about the mass. Like that's a very Marxist, even like hearing myself say that it's about the mass consciousness. But real theurgy, like they're trying to forge us, just like the Masonic compass happens at Tippereth, at the sun. That's where gold is. That's what's associated with the sun, is the planetary metal of gold. And so I think that is exactly right. Like, but it also produces a false light, a light of the ego, a light of that man is somehow above it. And yes, we are special. And if you're thinking like Judeo-Christian way of thinking, we're special. Like this is our world, and we get to decide what we want to do with it through free will. But it is not that we are not above God. We aren't above creation. We are just a part of it. But we are a high part of it. But it's it's still like we get to do what we want to a degree. It's never there's always a an exchange, right? There's always this equivalent exchange, like Full Metal Alchemist. You probably don't know that, but that's okay. Really nerd. But I mean, that's how it is. There's always an exchange. There's always a transference. So the best place to be is in balance. That's something that Kabbalah really emphasizes, is to bring the spheres into synthesis, but it has to be a balanced synthesis. It's not one pillar overwhelming the other. And this is also an idea in Freemasonry and their black and white checkerboard. But people tend to, and this is something that Zach Schumer often says, is that people tend to get stuck playing the game, where the better position is to not play the game, but be able to sort of cross the board as you will, but you're not playing it so other people are playing it around you. You're just focused on yourself. It's just it's almost individualistic. And I know that's become a dirty word. That's why I find it interesting in like to contrast it, but it's not really contrast, really complement to what you're saying about the mass, about the agglomeration, about the whole. Sorry, I know that was
interesting. No. I mean, I think your perspective is so interesting, and I mean, unlike any other commentator on the subject like this that I'm aware of. But I really value it. And yeah, but I mean, this is something like I'm probably going to listen back to this like 3 or 4 times and just try to figure out exactly, try to get some better understanding of everything that you're saying. But I definitely, so as far as the mass, so can you elaborate on, I'm sorry, or like just clarify that, like where
So
you're coming from with that aspect.
Okay, so I'm really referring to that Marxist idea of mass formation.
Mm-hmm.
But because they're drawing from what to me seems like they're drawing from the blue pillar, we're also talking about mass consciousness. So we're saying those two things are different, but then they're also the same, just like they're kind of the same in Marxism, because you're supposed to, Marxism has a very non-dual sensibility. Very interesting if you think about it from a metaphysical perspective, because most really esoteric, like the really secret meanings of most esoteric things. This is less true for Western esotericism, but it's very true for what we'll say is Eastern mysticism, is that non-duality and like that non-dual consciousness, that is the most important thing. So, but Marxism also teaches that in some ways. It's just that the people that usually practice Marxism or have a really strong understanding of Hegel, they know what's up. They realize what it is. They see that it's alchemy. Like, they're not dumb. They'll play dumb. They'll never admit to it. But it's so obvious. You can't read Hegel and then come away and be like, okay, no, he's a magician. That's what it is. That's who Hegel was fundamentally. So
what do you mean by that? I just have to follow up on that point. I'm not disagreeing at all.
No. So Hegelian dialectics is just Kabbalah. I mean, that's all it is. It might be Hermetic Kabbalah. It might be like slightly different understanding, but that's all it is. That's what I say that's what I mean when I say you can map dialectics, because it was already done. That's what Hegel was doing. He just codes his language, like you were talking about how Hoffman talks about what we call in Sanskrit, Samdhyabhasa, which is the Twilight language. That's the same word we use in Buddhism, same word that it's in Hinduism, everything. That's how you derive mantras, is that you do specific formulations, almost mathematical, with the letters, just like they do in Hebrew, and they derive a sound or a secret name of God, or it's something. It's just you're deriving something from a formulation of words, but it's secret. It's not well known. It's like a proof almost. So I think mass formation, mass consciousness, we're talking about the grouping of humanity. They're also very eugenicist. I think you've pointed this out many times on your show. And they have it's very, very clear on both sides, both dialectical puppets. The eugenics is like overwhelming. That's a clear fascination for them. And I also think that I do think that something you said was really interesting when you were talking about what Hoffman was saying about their belief in their origins. And when I did I'm still working on it, but the Twyman series, I do not believe that they have ancient origins. Like I would have maybe a year or 2 years ago said, yeah, sure, they have ancient origins, and I do think that there probably are some of them that are derived from Templars or whatever. But a lot of their ideas are about channeling and channeled spirits. And you can see there's an overlap in Unitarianism, in spiritualism, in the Esalen Institute, in like the Laurel Canyon and the Dave McGowan stuff. Like there's a lot of occultism in
Mhm.
all of that. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
right? So I mean, it's you cannot divorce it. It's there. They
Mhm.
are doing magic, but they aren't doing magic. It's not just spells. It's mind control. It's perceptual management. That's what magic really is. And that's why I always feel somewhat of an outsider when it comes to pop culture things, because I really cannot engage with a lot of it. I cannot. It doesn't bring me joy. It's like nothing. It's actually, I find it psychically offensive.
Same, honestly. That's really interesting to hear. Always, my whole life, I felt that way. It's interesting. Yeah, and I don't really know that I've met too many other people who feel that way, but that has been a consistent thread in my life of just feeling baffled, but some combination of baffled and just a general aversion to engaging with pop culture, mass media stuff.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you say that, so I don't feel like such a black sheep. But I think it's so embedded, and this is what I don't understand about a lot of the con left sort of ideas of it. I know you have KB on your show now, and then I love KB. I think he's like a great dude and a really strong analytical mind. And so, but he always had to balance sort of like these different factional thinking in conspiracy circles, which is really interesting, even of its own example to think about. But I think that they don't want to admit the blatant occultism, and then the right wing does this other thing which is also very managed, where they'll say it's all Satanism, it's all this. Like, yeah, that's part of it. That's part of
Mhm.
it. I'm not saying it's not part of it. But what do they mean by Satanism too? Because this is like goes back to the idea of what is communism. Like, what someone
Mhm.
calls Satanism, it might be offensive to you, it might be against your personal religious values, but is that person saying that it is Satanism? Is like that what the definition is? I think definitions are so important. And maybe this is
Mhm.
like my magic mind, like the way I think about the world, is names of things are so important, and they give you power over things, but they also give you, it can also be an illusion. Like the name itself can be an illusion. And that's what I think about when people say Satanism. And my thinking of this has really changed in that I try and look at it through the process theology. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Manson was process theology connected, process church
Mhm.
connected. And oh yeah, we discussed this. I discussed this with you on your show. I totally
Yeah,
forgot.
I don't know too much about it. So, but yes, I'm sort of high level familiar, but yeah, anything you want to say, I'm sure would be illuminating to me. So,
Well, I think that you can use the process theology, which is a swastika, interestingly, and you
mm.
can, and they have four quadrants, just like an Aristotelian dialectic of God, interestingly. And so they say that the four gods are Yahweh, Christ, not Jesus, Christ,
Hmm.
um, Lucifer, and Satan. But those are actually all different kinds of, if you want to say it like a Buddhist way, like they're different vehicles of the same religion, but they might believe completely different things. Like a Yahwehist believes, and I'm not talking about Jews, okay? This is very important. Just note, talking about process theology, how they think of it. But this branch of process theology does attract a lot of people who were raised in Judaism because of the familiarity of the name. And then also because they are taught that Yahweh favors them only. But it doesn't, not all the people that belong to that sect are Jewish. It's just that is their belief, is that Yahweh is like an angry God who favors them in particular. Then you have Christ, who is really in yourself. So it's almost Lucifer, or it's almost satanic, where you're worshiping yourself. but
Mhm.
it's not quite the self. It's like, it's almost the will. It's like it's almost Crowleyan. It's like you worship your own will. Like you will put your desires forth into the world as like the savior, as the hero.
Mhm.
And then you have Luciferianism, which really means the worship of the truth. And when I say the truth, I don't mean it in like a Kabbalistic way. I mean the truth as in like you want to know how everything works to the most minute detail. Like it's very Dewey Decimal System. He was a Luciferian, like an open.
Really interesting.
And he, like, what was his whole goal? The epistemology of all knowledge, like to categorize it into little tiny silos and boxes. And then you have Satanism. And what is Satanism? So Satanism really becomes this more anti-cosmic plus the worship of the self. So some people take it in a more theistic direction, and then some people take it in a more self-worshiping direction. And those are both the same. Like I'm not saying they're the same, but they're not different either. So you have these four quadrants. And so because it seems like this cult has sort of, that this is the cult. Like if you want to say the they, them, or the they, whoever they are, this is who they are. This is what it is. It's been since 1947. It's been earlier than that. Probably Dutch West India Company, East India Company. I mean, we know that the pirates, I know Richard Grove from Grand Theft World talks a lot about this idea of like the origin of they as the pirates. And then some people say, oh, they're Phoenicians or whatever. But again, it's all kayfabe really, because their origins are really in channeling. So they are given messages to perform whatever ritual of their quadrant. So they are told that these rituals are based on the ancient whatever Mesopotamian things that they used to do, okay?
Uh-huh.
But it doesn't mean that they actually are. That's what my whole
Right.
point is. I sort of meandered and I apologize, but that's what it is. It's like they believe it, and like I don't believe what they believe,
Mhm.
but they believe it. So you have to be able to discuss it seriously. And sometimes I think even with conspiracy theorists and even with occultists, like occultists tend to like go, and I'm like this to go a little edgelord where they're like, yeah, I'll like dabble in like a little of this and give a little signal here and like nod to this. Like, yeah, I do that. It's like very funny and edgy sometimes. But also I want to call things the proper name. So
Mm.
that's where I try and bring it. So I tend to see all of this as like they want to swirl us together, like how they move the swastika as a turning wheel. They want to swirl it all together, bring it into unification, bring it into synthesis, bring it into homogenization, because it's their idea of what they want. It's not anyone. So this is the thing. Crowley was right in the sense that your will is super important. Like this is true in Kabbalah, and this is true in magic, and this is also true in Buddhism. You have to know what you want before you can decide what you're going to do with that knowledge. So if they're leading you through coercion or through your own ignorance, that is on you. That's not on them. They're just
Mhm.
using the tools that the master gave them, whatever that is. Hiram Abiff, Esau, whatever, Cain. I know there's a lot of people who are into the Chainites, and it's interesting in its own sort of way. But really, what matters is like you use the tools for yourself. That's really the whole point.
That's interesting because I think, yeah, I mean, a lot of it seems to be like they're trying to hijack the will of others,
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
they want to make your will support their ends. And yeah, I think that's hard for a lot of people to accept because like I was up until, a few years ago, I basically considered myself a leftist. And again, I'm not trying to say that like anything associated with leftism is bad, but part of the hard part of reckoning with this shift has been kind of this understanding of like how separating out what are actually my own thoughts
Mm-hmm.
and values versus what has sort of been basically implanted in me. And it's kind of a scary question to grapple with in an honest way.
Honestly, this is really a fundamental conversation, or a fundamental thing you're saying, is that what is your will, taking away all the bullshit, all the identity stuff. Not that you have to worry about that, but it is a question. It's a question in the ether of what even that means, what race is. And again, you can be race realist, you can have like an identity in a mild way, but those things are all bullshit, sort of. I mean, I'm going to say, I won't say sort of, they are kind of bullshit. So, it is hard, and it is really scary. And it is like, what do we make of these things? Like, I realize, like, I'm not as racist or fascist as I thought. Not that I ever thought I was, but, I sometimes you go along with things. I
Right, you
personally,
say, oh, leftism was bad, so now I'm just gonna do the other thing,
yes, exactly. You go directly to the dialectical opposite. And I think that was intentional, because like, that happened to me, where I was like, yeah, like, but like, what does the right really offer? They're not really particularly cogent. They want, like, you have like people who are monarchists, which, yeah, is an interesting idea. I'm not gonna lie, I do find it interesting, but I'm like not the right one to ask about that, because I find a lot of ideas interesting. That doesn't mean that they're good or bad. I just, I'm like that. I have that Luciferian tendency where I like to know things. That's the truth. But I do think that our generation were psyoped really heavily into leftism. I could never even imagine having a right-wing opinion 10 years ago.
No, same. And I mean, even now, I mean, I don't feel comfortable voicing my opinions and pretty much anyone in real. I mean, I have a few friends who I can, but like in my kind of everyday social circle, I just can't really speak freely. And or if I did, I would risk social ostracization, basically. So
that's what's crazy, is that is also something of that red pillar, is that it's the restriction of speech. So you can't voice things into manifestation. And I think that, again, speaks to dialectical opposition, that they both serve the same purpose. Yes, the right is in a bit of an oppressed, that's not the right word, but we'll just, a more marginal position. And so it is not comfortable. It is not okay to speak those things into reality. But, I see a lot of people talking about Reagan and talking about George Bush. Fuck those dudes.
No,
Like, those guys are horrible. Like, I'm sorry, like, I don't even like that word neocon, because like literally everybody has a little bit of that in them. It just depends on the issue, it seems like. But those guys were horrible. Like, they weren't good people. So I can't be down with like this hero worship. But I will also say that I pray for a Trump presidency, if only because I do still find it, even though it's a little passe now, I do still like the idea of him winning, just to trigger people who are horrible and terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, though, living in a very liberal area, then it's just something that I'll have to like endure for like the whole time. But yeah, I mean, it's a no-win situation, honestly. But I would still say I would I mean, would rather have Trump than Kamala or whatever, but for no real reason. But yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm not even like, I don't even really consider myself like a super right-wing guy. Like, I don't know. Like, my thing is more just, I realize like just opting out of the thought manipulation and focusing on your own sphere of control and forging your own path and whatnot. But it's like, because everyone else is so psyoped, It's
Mhm.
like if you're question, like I'm just like, okay, whatever, like 9/11 was bullshit, COVID was bullshit, but it's like, and it's not really like a right wing thing. I'm not saying like set up concentration camps for like my ethnic minorities or whatever, but it's like if you say anything that's kind of criticism of the mainstream narrative, everyone is conditioned to respond as though you just like you really transgress the ultimate taboo. I mean, it's very bizarre.
I think that's a really great note to close on, is that the everything is about the provocation and the transgression that results from it. Because there's no more transgression anymore. Like, there's no more social transgression. It's all in our face. It's
Mm-hmm.
all over the internet. I mean, I'm a little more innocent than some of our peoples will say, in the sense that I don't know about who's sleeping with who. I don't know about Twitter porn. I don't know any of this. I really don't. I keep myself happily naive. So I just feel like, but everything. So to speak your true voice, or just your opinion, or just say, my dad's an immigrant. I'm fine to say that there are too many. Like,
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with it now, because, like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that to me is very transgressive compared to what I used to think. Like, to say
Mm-hmm.
that. So I think everything's a provocation, and I think that you're 100% clear in the right move, which is to really control your own sphere of influence, and the best way you can. Although everything tries to pull you outwards. That's what I find.
Yes.
Everything's like, care about this, care about these people that you don't even know exist, like, care about this country. And I'm not saying that we should go do terrible things, but I'm saying, like, why do we have to care? Like, do we?
Yeah, well, and that is, and didn't even really make this connection until literally just now, but that's really why I left Twitter. Like I felt it was just like pulling me out into things that don't matter. And there was a lot of value that I gained from it, and relationships and friends that I made, including yourself, that I do miss. But ultimately, just that pull into bullshit, like that's what it just became too much.
You're totally right, and I agree with you. And I have been sort of reforging, not my show or myself in a broader way, maybe, yes, but not intentionally. But I've been thinking a lot about, like, what is, like, the next move, like, what
Mm.
is the move for me that's going to be, like, right. And I think I'm very magic pilled, in the sense that I'm not saying go do magic to people listening, but I do believe that there are tools available for people. They are esoteric, but they don't have to be magical. They don't have to be occult. They don't, it doesn't involve any transgressive thing. It just involves yourself and a bit of your time and your mental faculties. But I do think that, to co-opt a phrase from the left, use the tools of the master's house, I think that
Mhm.
could be a very valuable thing for a lot of people, rather than running into the externality, running into, and I'm pro-religion, I'm not anti-religion, but people tend to go for the superficial quality of that, or the
Mhm.
identity of that. And that that has to really be a practice. I really appreciate that you came on my show. Do you want to, I'll let you have the full floor if you have any closing thoughts, and please plug your Substack, plug your show, plug your co-host.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me on. I thought it was a great conversation. I flew by. I can't believe we're already an hour and a half in. So yeah, again, just really appreciate it. Yes, Thoughts and Prayers. We are on Substack. It's Thoughts and Prayers at Substack. thoughtsprayers.substack.com. And we are now releasing episodes only for the paid subscribers. Period. I think the Trump episode, the assassination episode, is available for the public. We thought that was people needed to hear that one. But yeah, I have a Substack at lowiqmoron.substack.com. There is currently no content on there, but it is something I am trying to do in some capacity at some point. But yeah, really just happy to still be in the mix despite my absence from the Demon app. So
when you are ready to fill your Substack with content, please come back on and plug that Substack. So, and I do feel like your presence is missed. I think you were kind of, as Q would say, the dad of a group of misfits. But I actually think it's healthy what you did, and I think it was the right time. And you have a great show, and you're always welcome on this show. And yeah, I really appreciate you. And yeah, this was an amazing conversation, really. 23. So we produce some knowledge and synthesis. So there you go. And people will have to discern what kind of knowledge it is, whether it's solar or lunar.
Love it. Love it. All right. Well, thanks, Jen.
Okay. Thanks. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Vegeta, thanks.
For what? I should be thanking you, Kakarot.
Nah, what do you mean? I loved every minute. Goodbye, my friend.